Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry-Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson. Grab a virtual donut and a hot beverage as we race through this week's announcements, and boy, we have a lot of them. We've got AI, cloud, and hardware announcements from HPE, an end-of-life announcement from Dell, that doesn't happen very often, some acquisitions by LogicMonitor and Marvell, and networks in space, and more.
Today's episode is sponsored by Meter. Meter delivers full-stack networking infrastructure from wired to wireless to cellular in a single integrated solution that scales from branch offices, warehouses, and large campuses to data centers. Go to meter.com/networkbreak to book a demo now. That's meter.com/networkbreak to book a demo. And then stay tuned after the news. We have a sponsored Tech Bytes conversation with RG Nets. So RG Nets builds gateways and centralized authentication appliances to help manage and automate revenue-generating networks. But RG Nets founder Simon Locke came on to the show to talk about DPUs. They don't make DPUs or use DPUs, but Simon wanted to talk about DPUs. So Simon sat down and talks with Ethan Banks about how the technological and market conditions that are necessary to turn DPUs from a niche product into a transformational technology. It's interesting stuff, so stick around for that. And just a reminder, Packet Pushers has a merch store. So the holiday season is upon us, and maybe you want to treat yourself with a t-shirt or a hoodie or a mug or some other item proudly emblazoned with the logo of your favorite show. You can check out our wares at store.packetpushers.net. All right, John, take us into the red alert.
Okay, well, there were 575 CVEs created in the week ending December 4th, with 1,334 updated. Of those, 182 were rated critical, scoring 9 or higher. Only 9 scored 10 out of 10. This week's red alert is a 10 out of 10 on React server components. React is a super popular open-source JavaScript library for web application UI building. React server components execute code on the application server to do things like interact with databases or other applications, and use the results in rendering HTML that's then sent to the client. According to CVE 2025-55182, there is pre-authentication remote code execution vulnerability in the React server components code, included in multiple packages of versions 9.0.0, 9.1.0, 9.1.1, and 9.2.0. As is often in the case in RCEs, the code doesn't properly sanitize its input, where have we heard that before, and instead passes stuff directly to a shell for execution. An unauthenticated attacker can send malicious HTTP requests to any React server function endpoint that, when deserialized by React, will result in remote code execution on the server. Okay. React.dev issued a security bulletin with lots more details and recommends, wait for it, immediate upgrade to a fixed version of the code, which is 9.0.1, 9.1.2, and 9.2.1. What a surprise. The solution is always upgrade.
Yeah, I saw this pop up on social media, and a lot of dev type folks sort of had a hair on fire approach. I was like, I wonder if we're going to see this in Network Break. But yeah, links in the show notes. This sounds like a bad one. All right, to the news. So, Jonna, one big question that you and I and others have talked about during the HPE Juniper acquisition was how the company is going to handle 2 competing wireless platforms under the same corporate umbrella. At HPE Discover in Barcelona, the company's begun to provide some broad strokes of the strategy, which seems to be it's going to continue to develop and invest in both the Juniper Mist and the Aruba networking central platform. So they're going to keep pushing those. But they're also hoping to try and bridge these 2 platforms via agentic AI. Agentic AI is going to act as a mechanism to allow the platforms to use features and capabilities within each. So here's a little bit of what they came out with at Discover. They're announcing that Juniper Mist's Marvest actions, which are automated actions to fix wireless and wired issues, will now be available in HPE Aruba Networking Central. In addition, Mist's Large Experience Model, or LEM, which combines network data from running apps with synthetic data generated by network digital twins to detect, fix, and predict network issues affecting user experience problems in Zooms and Teams, is now also going to be available in Central. And Johnny, you raised a question in our notes. Is it just Zooms and Teams, or more broadly? My understanding is at the moment, it's just Zooms or Teams, but if you've got a follow-up or you know more about it, please let us know, packetpushers.net/FU. At the same time, Juniper Mist can now access the client profiling capabilities and the NOC view from Aruba Networking Central, so you can now do that from Juniper Mist. So, John, it seems like what they're saying is we're going to develop the 2 products separately, but we're going to find ways to integrate features and capabilities with both. In a blog post that we have linked in the show notes, they talk about how, because both these platforms are built on microservices, essentially that makes them like Lego blocks you can just sort of snap together via APIs, and then some hand waving about how agentic AI is going to bridge this all together. And I feel like that seems a little too easy for this, and I was curious to get your take, Jonna.
Well, I'd go take a step back and say essentially the question that you raised at the beginning, Drew, was really how the company would handle two competing wireless platforms. And we have the answer, which is both and at the moment.
Right.
So they're going to continue to invest in both of them. I think that's actually a key point because it means that if you're using one or the other, you will not at least immediately be forced to switch from one to the other, which is actually
Sure.
good news for folks.
Yeah.
I think the integration is kind of par for the course for both Juniper and HPE. I wrote an insanely popular blog LinkedIn post several months ago now when they first announced the merger. Well, actually, it's more than several months. But when they first announced the merger, talking about the fact that, look, both of these companies invest very heavily on centralized management for their infrastructure. And so I can't imagine that they would stop doing that as a merged company. And in fact, it just seems like the logical next step that you can do that integration. I think they're working to find the right sweet spot between complete integration, which then begs the question of why even have two separate product lines, and functional integration, which adds value to anybody who happens to be using both. And that's what I think we're hearing here.
It sounds like it. I feel like, though, they're making it sound like it's going to be really easy and everything will just sort of snap together and you're not going to have any issues. And I feel like that doesn't sound like how integrating two major different platforms ever works.
No, but I mean, baseline, it's easier than it is now. They're putting some effort into it, so it's going to be easier than it would be today or having two separate. So it's like, okay. You don't have to believe all of the hype to feel like, okay, this is positive. Let's see how far it'll go.
And at least we do have a sense of the strategy they're going to be pursuing for at least the near future. Along that line, HPE also announced it would deliver a Wi-Fi 7 access point that can run on either Aruba Central or Mist. There are no details on how this will work as yet. This AP is expected to be available in the third quarter of 2026. I guess I shouldn't fault them for not having more details because Wi-Fi 7 is still in its ramp-up phase. I will note Extreme Networks sort of went through this with all of the acquisitions they did. They had a whole bunch of different AP vendors they acquired, and essentially their solution was, we give you one hardware platform, you get to choose the operating system and management system on top of it that you want. So I wonder if that's what HPE is hoping to do here as well. But again, it's reinforcing this notion of your yes and strategy. We're going to have both, or both and.
Yep. Yeah, it's a both and strategy, not an either or strategy. And in more HPE news, they are beefing up, companies aren't it is beefing up private cloud with an expanded focus on Morpheus. The company announced a slew of updates to the private cloud solution, proffering Morpheus, the hybrid cloud management software acquired in 2024, as a replacement for VMware. This is actually important for those of you who are considering getting off the VMware bus at some point. Hoping to cash in on the roiling rage directed at Broadcom for enormous price hikes on VMware, and we will have more about VMware shortly, and promising private clouds with 10% the licensing cost of VMware, HPE announced software-defined networking for VMs hosted in Morpheus's HVM hypervisor, capable of implementing microsegmentation in the service of a zero-trust architecture among VMs, integration of the Juniper-created Apstra data center director into Morpheus. So again, some of that both and an integration conversation. That gives you automatic configuration of virtual and physical switches to ensure consistent VLAN definitions and security policies. Stretched cluster technology with synchronous replication for VMs on the HVM hypervisor, and the ability to combine stretched clusters with HPE's Alletra peer persistence tool to enable failover between geographically distributed sites, which is a nice practical application. They're also adding full support for Kubernetes and containerized workloads on top of the HVM hypervisor, and integration of the HPE Zerto software with HPE Morpheus for continuous data protection. And finally, last but not least, ability to integrate with the Veeam data platform for hypervisor-based image level backup and rapid recovery for VMs. Kubernetes is available now. Everything else, you have to wait till next year. But this is a really interesting one because, as you can see, they really are trying to capitalize on what's going on with VMware, and this may be a credible solution for those who have just decided that you're done with Broadcom. So worth following at the very least.
Yeah, I'm going to summon the ghost of Greg Farrow, our old Network Break co-host, who always said, enterprises love to complain about the price of software, but will mostly just pay up because, especially if you're talking about a migration. I'm happy to see HPE taking a crack at this because if ever there was a moment to dislodge some customers from VMware, this is probably it. But again, if I was going to put money down, I'd put money down on most people are just going to stay put.
I'll just argue with you slightly, only because of the economic environment we're in at the moment. We're getting massive layoffs, particularly in the IT space. I think I've mentioned about 1 million layoffs in the U.S. alone this year. If you're looking at your team and you're going, gosh, I could keep a bunch of team members or I could keep VMware, that's enough to kind of motivate you to keep the team members because the team members can help you with the transition to the new solution, and then you have them for when the recession ends, which hopefully will be at some point. So I think the timing is a little bit unusual. I think Greg's correct as he always was in the grand scheme of things, but I think in this particular instance, it may be that HPE has got the perfect storm of timing. Maybe not, but it's possible at least.
Yeah, I take your point, but I also think my cynical take is that most companies aren't thinking about, do I prefer software over headcount? They always prefer software.
So. No, that's actually not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people at this point, they're literally throwing the couch upside down and thumping the back to get a couple quarters out. So this is like, where can I save money? So
okay.
Anyhow,
if you're out there and you are thinking about a transition, we'd love to hear about it because obviously John and I have different takes here. So
yeah, and if you think Greg's right and you want to weigh in and say that, please do because we'd like to hear that.
That's so. Right. All right, moving on, but sticking with HPE, they also announced some new hardware, including a new data center switch running Broadcom's Tomahawk 6 ASIC and promising 102.4 terabits per second bandwidth. The switch is aimed squarely at AI data centers. HPE also announced a new multi-service edge router. This is a 1RU box with 1.6 terabits per second throughput and 400 gig connectivity. It's aimed at edge-based AI inference workloads as well as mobile backhaul and metro routing. And one more hardware announcement. The company announced a new rackscale product with Juniper switching and AMD GPUs. It's called Helios. The rack can deliver up to 260 terabytes of scale-up Ethernet bandwidth and 2.9 exaflops of compute performance when fully loaded. HPE says this Helios rack can deliver AI training of 1 trillion parameters. I take this as another example of Ethernet switch vendors looking to compete against InfiniBand, while also giving potential customers an alternative to NVIDIA should they want it.
Yeah, and basically, HPE, what the heck were you doing in the past year? Right? Y'all have been lazy. So that's a lot of HPE announcements. I guess moving away from the HPE part of the show, Meter is rolling out some new network hardware. So sticking with the theme of network hardware, Meter has announced new gear, including new switches, APs, firewalls, and gateways for out-of-band management. Meter, as you're about to hear from the ad, builds its own network hardware and develops its own network software. The new products include 2 new access layer Ethernet switches and a new core switch, 3 new firewalls, including a 50 gig model in stateful inspection mode, and 2 new Wi-Fi 7 APs. Meter says the new equipment will begin shipping to customers as part of their subscription starting in early 2026. And there's a link in the show notes for more, as well as an ad spot where they'll tell you a bit more about themselves.
Yes, I'm sure Meter's marketing department is very happy that they got the 3 cherries on here with some Meter news and a Meter ad. So Meter is a sponsor today. They deliver full stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular to leading enterprises. It's a single integrated solution with everything included. And I mean everything. That's ISP procurement, security, routers, switches, wireless, APs, firewall, cellular, power, DNS security, VPN, SD-WAN, and multi-site workloads. Meter has designed the hardware, written the firmware, and built the software. It is a truly truly integrated solution. And alongside their partners, Meter designs, deploys, and manages everything required at your site or sites so you get performant, reliable, and secure connectivity. If you're ready for fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of managing multiple providers or tools, check out Meter. Go to meter.com/networkbreak and you can book a demo now. That's meter.com/networkbreak. Network break is all one word, and book that demo. We thank Meter for being a sponsor.
All right. And moving right along, CRN has reported that Michael Dell says that VxRail is no longer a thing. We're mentioning this because it's so unusual for vendors to actually talk about end of life of things. So we just highlighted that. Also, it's another spotlight on what's going on with VMware. So in the wake of Broadcom's aggressive new pricing policies for VMware, Michael Dell says VxRail is no longer a thing. Dell is not only not pushing VxRail, its formerly popular pre-integrated hyper-converged infrastructure for VMware platforms, it's actively incentivizing its VAR partners to move customers off it. So, guys, migrate away. Instead, Dell is leaning into its private cloud technologies, which are being combined with virtualization platforms from Nutanix, Microsoft, and Red Hat. Folks do run VMware on top of it as well, and Dell is enticing them to do so as a transitional step away from VxRail and towards the newer disaggregated infrastructure built on Dell's PowerStore or PowerFlex storage lines and relying on Dell Automation Platform for ops automation. The CRN actually reports that Dell Technologies Chief Partners Officer Denise Millard said that moving customers away from VxRail is the number one issue Dell is talking about with partners, which is really interesting. This is another reason why I think, HPE may not be completely bonkers in going after some of that juicy ex VMware dollar.
Yeah, I'm starting to maybe come down a little bit on your side after hearing about this one. I remember when hyperconverged infrastructure was all the rage. Interesting to see not only Dell saying get off this particular one because of VMware, but also starting to want to move people toward disaggregated infrastructure. We're getting back into this cycle of integrate and then disintegrate. It's kind of funny to see.
Yeah, right.
Moving on, infrastructure and cloud monitoring company LogicMonitor has acquired Catchpoint. Catchpoint specializes in digital experience monitoring and internet performance monitoring. Terms of the acquisition were not disclosed. Catchpoint specialized in looking at a user's experience of a network and applications. This is a client agent that can measure network and application performance, including the last mile. It also offers distributed agents that can run synthetic tests to measure network connections between endpoints and cloud and SaaS apps. So this acquisition gives LogicMonitor a more robust suite of tools for monitoring both now on-prem and distributed networks. I feel like DEM or digital experience monitoring really came to the fore during the pandemic as more and more people work from home. These days, though, it seems like this is turning out to be less of a product category and more of a feature in a larger observability suite. You can even find DEM capabilities in like security products now. So no longer just
and it's none too soon. I swear. I started my career actually when I was chief technology officer for a consulting and engineering firm. One of the groups that we had was specialized in doing nothing more than DEM for financial services folks. Like, how do you figure out why things are not working well across these extremely low latency financial networks? So, and that was a really long time ago. Let's not talk about how long time ago it was. So I'm glad to see it's now just sort of become a feature. It's expected.
Yep. Sticking with acquisitions, silicon maker Marvell, mostly known to our audience, I think, for their ASICs, has announced it's going to acquire Celestial AI, which makes optical interconnects for $3.25 billion. This will be a combination of cash and stock. Celestial AI provides what it calls a photonic fabric that provides optical interconnects within and across racks of compute. So we're seeing the rise of AI infrastructure and rack-scale GPU clusters like that aforementioned HPE Helios. This is driving an increased demand for higher throughput and lower power consumption. Marvell says the acquisition will accelerate its, quote, connectivity strategy for next-generation AI and cloud data centers, meaning they're hoping to get folks off copper and onto optical interconnects, which they may be more expensive, but in the long term, maybe you'll save on the power and the cooling, the better performance you get from optical.
Yep, and all I can say on that one is I just generally think Marvell has done a good job executing, having a sane strategy and executing well against it. So based on what we know about this, it seems like a good move for them.
All right, moving on. Cisco Investments, that's the investment arm of Cisco Systems. They've joined a Series A round of investment in a company called NetFoundry. NetFoundry straddles networking and security. They offer software and services that provide secure network overlays that can control access to applications and devices, such as IoT and OT devices, while incorporating identity-based authentication and authorization. NetFoundry is the commercial version of an open source project called OpenZD. The Series A is 15 million. Cisco Investments has gone in for 3 million of that number. NetFoundry is tapping into several key areas of interest of Cisco, I think, including microsegmentation and zero trust. The offering is software-based or can be provided as a service, so no hardware angle for Cisco, but I think that security networking intersection certainly appeals to Cisco Investments. Again, summoning Greg Farrow, as he used to say, an investment's nice, but let's see if down the line Cisco decides to put a ring on it.
I would agree with Greg on that one. I think he gets the last word here.
Okay. Two financial results, and then Jana will hear about some space networking. First, the aforementioned Marvell reported financial results for their Q3 of fiscal 2026. For the quarter, revenues were just over $2 billion, up 37% year over year. Net income was $1.9 billion, and that number struck me as odd given that its revenues were just over $2 billion.
Yeah, right.
Are they the most efficient company ever created?
Right.
But that net income number was boosted because they sold off their automotive Ethernet business, which netted the company $1.8 billion. So, for comparison, in the previous quarter, the company had a net income of $194 million. And just not bad.
Yeah, small company, feisty, but does things well. So they compete with Broadcom. More power to them. Let's see how they go.
Yeah, very tough to compete against Broadcom, but so far Marvell making a go of it. HPE also reported results for Q4 of 2025. For the quarter, revenues were $9.7 billion, up 14% year over year. For the full year, revenues were $34.2 billion. By business unit, networking was the star. Revenues were $2.8 billion, up 150% from this time last year, I think highlighting the direct contribution of the Juniper business to the newly combined company. Server revenue was $4.5 billion, down 5% year over year. That number surprised me, given all the AI infrastructure spending we've been seeing. And as a counterpoint, Dell Technologies, which we talked about last week, saw their server revenue go up 37%. So I don't know if there's just some weird fluctuation in HPE's sales cycle or if they missed a trick there. HPE also saw revenue dip in hybrid cloud and had flat revenues from financial services. So, tip of the hat to Antonio Neri for picking up Juniper because it really helped pull HPE into positive territory for this quarter.
Yep. All right. So wrapping up today's episode with a couple of space networking.
Nice.
Or networks in space. First of all, December 2nd saw the launch of 3 satellites intended to serve as a test bed for low Earth orbit alternatives to Starlink and Amazon LEO, which used to be called Kuipers, right?
Yep.
And other proprietary satellite networks. Built around, get this, a blockchain-based network management protocol, SpaceCoin nanosatellites are meant to be the first nodes in the world's first, quote, decentralized physical infrastructure network, or DPIN. The SpaceCoin protocol promises permissionless global internet connectivity for censorship-resistant internet access around the globe, which could be very interesting if they can deliver it, with an initial focus on underserved and remote regions. The protocol governs an open satellite data network managing authentication, authorization, and accounting across the decentralized infrastructure. The satellites are owned and operated by STI, which holds the necessary regulatory approvals for satellite operations, and integrated on the rideshare launch mission via Aero Science and Technology. The thing I want to highlight here is that notion of censorship-resistant internet access around the globe, because that can be a game changer. And in fact, probably about 25 years ago now, a couple of the internet folks and I were batting around ideas about how we would go about creating a highly censorship-resistant network. And the model that came up was what I called the Jelly Bean network, where you have a distributed mesh network of nodes, and what these guys are doing is taking that, putting it in space, and then putting the additional management protection of the blockchain protocol. So this is something to watch, because that could be a game changer. Because we've seen geographies cut off the internet when they want to do something nefarious. And
so, is there some kind of cryptocurrency scheme tied in with this as well? Because they're calling it SpaceCoin, or
I don't believe so. I think I could be wrong on this, and by the way, please write in if you have information to the contrary. But I think they were just sort of playing off the blockchain, Bitcoin sort of initial shared roots. But I don't believe there is any cryptocurrency component to this.
Because I remember a few years ago, a company came out that was trying to do sort of like a distributed competitor to like your ISP, where you would share your wireless signal with your neighborhood, and in
No,
exchange you could generate cryptocurrency. And okay, so this is not that. Okay,
that is, to the best of my knowledge, this is not that. I should say.
Okay,
I can't guarantee, but yes.
Okay.
And just yep. Go ahead.
If I could interrupt you for a second, Jana. Speaking of Kuiper, which we mentioned earlier in this thing, we had also talked recently about Project Kuiper, and we were wondering, one, how you pronounce it, and two, where the name came from. I had speculated that maybe it was a Polish astronomer. We got an FU from a listener who said, Amazon's Project Kuiper comes from Kuiper Systems, which was named after the Kuiper Belt, which was named after a Dutch-American astronomer, Gerard Kuiper. So again, maybe entirely butchering it, but at least we have a little bit more of a geographical clue on where the name came from. So thanks for that follow-up.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that follow-up. And by the way, it's not Kuiper anymore anyhow, because it's now Leo, but that's okay. We can pronounce Leo. That's good. All good. Last but not least, Starlink is adding 114 satellites. It's been a very busy week for them. They've had 3 launches from Cape Canaveral and another from Vandenberg between November 30th and December 4th. Among them, the launches added a total of 114 satellites to the SpaceX network infrastructure, joining the, wait for it, 9,064 satellites already in orbit. Currently, a total of about 12,000 is planned. Man, that's going to make the night sky interesting. So more satellites, more different networking technologies. Lots going on with networking in space.
So it's interesting because just over the Thanksgiving break, I visited my wife's family in the Colorado area, and my wife arranged an astronomy tour near Boulder, where we sat outside with a bunch of other people in the dark and looked up at the night sky. And one of the things that the folks happened to point out was a line of Starlink satellites. We could see them moving across the sky. They were all like in this neat little row, like little ducks following their mother. And the astronomer said, yeah, that's probably a sign that they were just recently deployed, because once they're deployed, they're sort of in a line and then they disperse to their locations. But it was totally fascinating to see, but also interesting because all these satellites in orbit are a problem for astronomers. So it's kind of tough.
Yeah. Well, and also a problem for the rest of us, because it's like if you like to look up at the old, age-old sky that, was the same sky that 3,000 years ago we looked at. Well, nope, not anymore.
Not anymore. Right. Progress? Who knows? All right. That wraps up the news portion. Jana, where can folks get more from you online?
Hit us up on Substack, nemerdies.substack.com, and you can always ask to be contacted. We have a contact us form, so happy to hear from you.
I'm Drew Conry-Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM, and I'm blogging at packetpushers.net. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring today's episode. And please do stick around for our sponsored Tech Bytes conversation with RG Nets. Again, RG Nets is going to be talking about DPUs. It's an interesting conversation, so stick around. It's coming right up.
Welcome to Tech Bytes. We are chatting with RG Nets today, a company that's never been on the Packet Pushers podcast network before. And you know what we're going to talk about? Not much about RG Nets. I've got with me Simon Locke, founder, and we have been riffing on several different ideas. And even though he's the founder, he's the guy, the power behind RG Nets. Simon, you don't want to talk about RG Nets overly much, but at least give us a sense. What do you guys do?
We're a bunch of network automation engineers. Been in business for 18 years, small company. Provides the engineering and tooling and actually complete solutions for actually 4 of the 10 largest communication service providers in the United States.
Yeah, and you are, to say you're full service understates the case. Go to rgnets.com if you're interested in exploring more about what Simon's company is all about. But Simon, you wanted to, well, we kicked around a bunch of things, and I threw the topic of DPUs and how DPUs are being used for distributed computing at you now, and you engaged immediately on that. So let me set you up with this question, Simon. Are DPUs going to be a niche use case forever and ever, like they are now? I kind of think of them as like hyperscalers care, maybe, and maybe a lot of other people perhaps don't. Or are we going to see wide adoption of DPUs going forward?
There needs to be a catalyst. And most things of this nature, the catalyst is the developer community. It's one thing when you put out a platform. Let's say you're talking about simple thing like iPhones when they first came out. There was no simple way for you to add apps, right? You could do a web app, but that's it, right? But what made it crazy is when you had an app store and you had a community and you had SDKs and you had support, and then that drives a level of innovation that the world has never seen before. It goes beyond what the manufacturers thought. So that's what we need for DPUs.
But there is some of that, right? So the Pensando acquisition by Cisco, wherever, no, I forget where all that went. But there was a lot of that ecosystem built around that ecosystem, for example.
So there is some of that. But have you looked at the SDK documentation? I think it's called Doka for the NVIDIA version of it. It is there.
Yeah.
But it could be, it's nowhere near what you would find for some other kinds of things like that, right? And so the developer support is not quite there, and so that it makes it difficult for the community to kind of follow up behind that.
But do you think if we overcome that sort of accessibility challenge, that DPUs as a paradigm makes sense for everybody?
I think it makes beyond sense. I think that we are at the cusp of a pretty significant transformation. So think about what happened 20-ish years ago, right? 25-ish years ago, when we were buying servers from people that would sell you the server OS and the server together. And no matter who you talk to, one of the great crown jewels of Silicon Valley, we all know who they were from that time, it costs the same. You ever notice that? It was like you wanted to buy a entry-level server, it was 10 grand. You wanted to buy a workstation, it was 5 grand. It didn't matter who you buy it from. And then what happened? What happened was a great disaggregation. What happened was the developer community came in. What happened was that the processors got faster. You can say that was a Moore's law, you can say whatever. But that combination of things caused an unbelievable explosion. In the 20, 30 years, the server TAM has gone up by a factor of 5. Half of that now belongs inside data centers, cloud, supplied by ODMs. Well, if you look right now at the network industry, there's like this series of crown jewels who sell you the hardware and the software together. Mm-hmm. And no matter who you buy that wireless access point from, a Wi-Fi 7, 2x2 AB is whatever, $1,000, right? Have you noticed that? Seems like history is going to repeat itself. How can that possibly repeat itself? Well, for example, something like a DPU, because a DPU is programmable. A DPU, if you get a community behind it, allows you to load an arbitrary kind of series of things onto it. And if we just catalyze that a bit, I think there's going to be a pretty significant transformation in the way we do networking over the next 10 to 20 years.
But DPUs have been around for several years now in various iterations. Intel was pushing the notion of an IPU. We've had DPUs. We've had P4 as a language has been around. We've had various virtual network functions that you can load onto a DPU, and yet haven't had an explosion of use or use cases or wide adoption. Is it simply because of the difficulty of making that happen?
I think that's a large part of it. Do you remember how we used to get Linux going in the Slackware days?
Yeah, I think that's where I started with Linux.
Yeah. So like you went to, B. Dalton bookseller,
right?
And you went to the back of the store, the bottom shelf, and you bought the book, and it had either floppy disks or a CD-ROM.
I was going to say, it probably had a CD-ROM in the back, yeah.
Right? Or floppy disks. And then you got it to boot, but it wouldn't boot X Windows. So then you had to go and, recompile the kernel with these special things. Yep. And then you rebooted on the kernel that you made. And then, maybe it worked. And then you got an IBM PS2 that had microchannel architecture, and that didn't work. And that was kind of where we are right now with DPUs. You got to do some work, man, if you want this to happen. Now, what happened in the Linux world? Well, I hope it's okay to name names. Red Hat happened.
Yeah.
Red Hat happened, and the next day, I was the intern who was carting out a Sunfire E6500, which cost $400,000 out the back, throwing it out, and installing VA Linux servers with Red Hat on it.
I remember moving myself from Slackware to Red Hat. I remember exactly that transition.
Overnight.
Yeah.
We were carting millions of dollars of gear out because the support contract for 1 year exceeded the replacement cost by a factor of 3.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even that it was cheaper. It was astronomically different, right? So what needs to happen is the developer community needs to come around and center on this. the people that are building the hardware need to understand that supporting that community, right, is what's going to transform it. And then I think it'll solve itself.
It's the developer community that you're talking about, though. So there's enterprises that would want to consume this. There isn't much out there for them to consume because it's too hard to develop products that run on this platform.
There's no enterprise that's, the enterprise is focused on its core business. You run an agriculture business, you're focused on agriculture. What are you going to do? Start writing code for your DPU so that you can go and corn farm better? That's crazy, right? So the problem is they want the cheaper, but they're not enabled to do that. I think that if you presented this case to any enterprise, right, they would say, yes, I want that revolution, cheaper, better, faster. But they're not enabled to do that. What's going to make that happen is the developer community. It's going to be the community.
But the developers are going to be, I think, one of the classes of developers that are going to be interested in pushing these sorts of products out. That is virtual network functions that I can run on a DPU in a distributed fashion with the management plane architecture that's going to wrangle all of this and so on, are going to come from networking vendors. So Cisco, for example, I know they're doing some of this kind of thing, and they've got some hardware out there. But it's very specialized and specific to them. They've got a product that they're pushing out the door. It exists for certain customers that really want that. What is preventing other companies other than Cisco from getting into this world?
Well, one is, I would say, knowledge of the domain. In the current world where LLMs can generate code and whatever, right? As that gets better, one thing I've noticed is what doesn't change is whether or not you know what the heck you're doing. And LLM is great for anybody that wants to code simple things like I want to make a little game. Doesn't take much domain knowledge to do that. You want to go code something that's in the middle of a network with like $1 billion of stuff behind it? All right, that's an exaggeration. Each DPU, probably you can legitimately only put about 100 million behind it at full load. Right, so you take one DPU, you hook it up to one giant OLT with 14,000 or so ONTs behind it. Yeah, that's probably you can get about 100 million, right? One DPU. You're going to connect $100 million worth of stuff up. Well, you need to have some domain knowledge about that $100 million worth of stuff happens. Yeah. And so what you need is people that have that domain knowledge that want to go do this. And that's not there yet because we haven't supported them. We're in Slackware world. You think that dude that understands $100 million is going to want to go load floppy disks? That ain't going to happen, man.
Is the market there? Is there TAM for this if we were to improve the ecosystem?
Yeah. Oh, yes. There. In fact, some of the latest iterations of RGNet's tech stuff runs this, not just in the lab. I'm talking about in production. I got DPUs out there that are head ends of software-defined access networks with literally $100 million of gear southbound of it. Actually in production, not some lab. So there is a market for this. And there's people that are concerned about the fact that there is a market for this. Because if you think about it, right, what happened in server land? Some of the guys survived and grew.
Yeah.
HP survived, double the size it was from 1995. But others, as you know, they didn't survive. And this is the natural order of things. And new people came about. Right? When you look at that giant graph of who's doing servers now, there are people that weren't there in 1998.
So some companies are disincentivized from
Absolutely.
trying to make this. Okay.
They are incredibly disincentivized because when you do this from their perspective, which is probably, at least in my opinion, slightly flawed, they think that this hurts them, and it doesn't. It helps them because it makes the TAM grow much, much bigger. And rising tide lifts all boats.
But we've seen companies that have been able to successfully navigate these sorts of changes.
Yes.
They can make the pivot. Is it that hard to make this pivot?
Well, this is the human factor. Is it hard? Everything good in life is hard. But you have to decide that this is what you want to do. You have to decide that my comfort zone with whatever margins I have, selling a vertically integrated thing and locking people into it, that I'm going to give some percentage of that up for some amount of time until I can make this disaggregated world happen. And then the bigger TAM, makes me have now a total amount that's more. That kind of a equation, some people are willing to swallow that pill. Other people are not. Some people are actually smart enough to even know that's going to happen. But you know what? They don't care. Because they only need to make their stock price survive so-and-so, whatever that long is, so they can cash out, and then they're done, right? So this is not something that you can make a decision on based on a quarterly result, which is what most of the time we do.
And then you'll have some companies like the aforementioned Cisco that are going to figure out how to make it a vertically integrated solution anyway, where
Yes.
it's not an enabler to a disaggregated stack. It's something that happens to fit into their
Yes.
world.
And if you look at the historical evidence with respect to servers, there are still vertically integrated servers out there. They represent 25% of the market. And so there is a place for that. I'm not saying that everything has to be this way. Historically, we know that's not true. There absolutely should be vertically integrated OEM solutions. Heck, I have an Apple laptop in my bag. That's vertically integrated. I'm perfectly happy with it. I also have a framework in my bag that's disaggregated. Happy with that too, right? So there's a place for both of these things. But I think if you look historically, you'll see that because of the cost structure and just the cost structure alone, the disaggregated side tends to have a larger fraction of the TAM. It's more than half.
It's what a lot of customers want. I want to be able to go to some kind of a storefront, an app store kind of a model, let's say, and pick a variety of different virtual
Yes.
network functions that I can run on my
Yes.
DPU and have it work reliably.
Yes. And competition in a capitalist kind of a world is one of the great drivers of diversity and improvements and accelerations, right? It's that competition that allows our level of technology to improve, at least in the Western world that we have.
But going back to your opening point, at the moment, the DPU ecosystem is too gated, if you will. It's too hard to get in there and write code that is going to run on that DPU.
Yeah.
Plus, I have another question for you then. There's a variety of different DPUs out there.
Yes.
Meaning, I can't write, it's not one piece of code I can run on a variety of DPUs. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. And there's actually another kind of like corollary to that we didn't go over that actually, believe it or not, is a little bit of a problem. There are certain DPUs that are like firmware locked from the manufacturer, right? And so like when you firmware lock a DPU, that's like really crazy, right? Because then that means, you literally can only run the image that they provide, which is like, right? So that's one corollary. But let's say you overcome that, and I have been able to overcome that with enough oomph behind me, right? You bring in a communication service provider, one of the 4 largest in the United States, right? Then they're going to be able to overcome that. It might take a few weeks and some wrangling with VPs, but that's one actual serious problem. But let's say you overcome that. Then the next problem becomes something along the lines of what you're saying is, how do you run this on different things, right? Well, yes, that's a problem, but some of these advances we have with LLM type stuff make that a little bit better, because you can kind of take your idea, have your domain knowledge, and implement that in one thing, and then you kind of have like a lower layer for the interface to the individual interface names and whatever and blah blah blah, and have some if statements there, and off you go, right? So it's more doable than it has been before, largely because boilerplate type development is now pretty well understood that you can use LLMs to help you with that. And if you have a very solid development environment, red, green refactor type stuff, great, amounts of testing, this and that, that's kind of okay. Really, I think that the gap is the domain knowledge, right? So gap number one, the overall technology stack is still immature. There's not enough oomph behind that to make that more mature. Right. And I think that having community things like we're here at this AutoCon, right, that helps with that. Number two, you got a problem of that the people that have the domain knowledge, they don't have a great desire to be mucking around with this. Right. And then that combination, I think, is necessary, right? A desire for the domain knowledge, the tools, or whatever, to kind of get to a world that you were just describing before, which I think we'll get there. At least I hope we'll get there. I believe we'll get there. I would actually put a bet we'll get there. Maybe 10 years, right? But, that I think would be amazing, right? It would be absolutely amazing. It would get to the world where, a while back we used to talk about, switches. We're going to go install containers on switches. There was never enough CPU on the switch for you to be meaningful. But with DPUs, there is.
Yeah. As you said, we're at AutoCon. We're in Austin, Texas right now at the AutoCon 4 conference. If DPUs were to see wide adoption, what do you think is the impact to network automation?
One big change that I think that people are not thinking about is the ability to distribute the logic. So most of the DPU applications you see are like, I'm going to do line rate DPI with this thing that's accelerated about, or I'm going to do line rate SSL, blah, blah, with this because it's got an accelerator for that, right? But, there's also typically on a DPU a decent, not awesome, but like, an ARM CPU of some kind, right? You can put logic on there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have logic on there and you can distribute that logic and you can have some kind of centralized way for that to kind of talk back to it, right? I think that there's some pretty innovative and exciting things you can do with that, where the things out in the field are able to make decisions without having to phone home every time. Here's a very simple example. Let's say you're talking about, for example, allowing someone on the network, right? Then you're doing, let's say, a software-defined access network. So you got an underlay, you got an overlay, right? You want to let someone on the underlay. Typically, that's done with Mac auth or like some kind of 802.1x enterprise something or other, right? On the switch port kind of level, right? And so almost certainly that's going to talk to a radius server, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask is, how often does the admission criteria change in a typical, especially if you're talking about a kind of communication service provider type scenario? Like if you're like one of these big telcos, right? How often does the underlay change? Not very often. And so therefore, the concept that you're spending a gazillion cycles asking the same question over and over and over again to this one centralized thing may not be the best way to do it. And distributing that logic, maybe that's a better way to do it. Maybe that enables a kind of scalability that we haven't considered before. Maybe that enables that kind of scalability, which then reduces the cost, which means that we can expand the size of the underlays, which means that the total available market for access increases. So there's all sorts of very interesting ramifications of this if we just got together and pushed a little harder on it. And that's why I came here and sponsored this conference, right? I thought that this would be a great place for us to kind of get together and try to have some of these conversations. Maybe they'll go somewhere.
Well, Simon Locke from RGNet, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I wish we had more time because, man, your brain is on fire. I can see it from here. There's a lot going on, and it would be a lot of fun to talk to you about a lot of things. Maybe we have you back and chat at a future time about some other things. Now, you travel. I don't know, you're on the road a lot, but if people want to reach out to you, is LinkedIn a good place? How can people find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is fine, right? Also, I have a company. Website's there.
Website's there,
right?
rgnets.com.
Simple as that, right? Thank you for the opportunity, guys. I really appreciate it.
Enjoyed chatting with you, Simon, and thanks to you for listening. Sponsors like RGNets ensure that the Packet Pushers can continue to offer high-quality, deeply technical content for your professional development, and we do that so that it is free for you. That includes over a dozen technical podcasts for your professional development on networking, security, IPv6, DevOps, and more, an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, a community Slack group, our YouTube channel, which we are growing, more and more content going into that YouTube channel, and even an IRC group if you're old school like that. Find all of those things at packetpushers.net. It's all free, there's no login required, and you can hear us anywhere that you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. We are on LinkedIn, very big. Ethan Banks and Drew Conry Murray, especially if you follow our accounts, we are covering the industry day by day and week by week. Last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.